how do you get from one species to another? Okay, and this is where the Galapagos were very important, because a very important concept in speciation, in developing of a new species, is isolation. And so in the Galapagos, with these far-flung islands, you had the same species of finch that somehow got to one of these far-flung islands, but then became isolated, and they evolved in response to different pressures. One island was hot and dry, the other was mountainous and rainy, and different environmental stresses are going to drive the direction. And finally they get distinct enough so that they become different species. So what's a species? Technically, a species are animals are of a different species if they're of the same species if they can mate and produce fertile progeny. Okay, so my grandparents were obviously of the same species because my mother and father had 8 kids. Okay, so and all of those kids have reproduced. So they had fertile progeny. But if you take, for instance, a horse and a donkey and mate them, you get a mule. The horse and the donkey are different species. They can mate, but the mules are sterile. Okay, so they've drifted far enough apart genetically that they have become different species. And so by this isolation of these populations, these mutations can drift into different directions until they're finally far enough away that they can't reproduce. And we can see evolution in action today. A very important one that you see in the news a lot, antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Okay, so how do we get antibiotic-resistant bacteria? Well, bacteria are wonderful little evolutionary factories. They reproduce very quickly, they get a lot of mutations, and you know, if a couple million of them die off because of bad mutations, no problem, because you know, right now, if each one of us goes into our own intestinal tract, you know, we have more bacterial cells in our intestinal tract than we have human cells in the rest of our body. If you go out and take a scoop of dirt, you'll find more bacteria in that scoop of dirt than there are people on Earth. Okay, so there are gazillions of bacteria around, reproducing and mutating very quickly. So what do? We give them a good evolutionary pressure to evolve. You go in for some nondescript ailment, and the doctor gives you an antibiotic, and you come home and take a little bit of it, and you feel better, so you stop. So what have you done? You've killed off the weaklings, and you've left behind the ones that have any mutations that makes them more resistant. You know, you have been an agent of evolution. Don't do that. So that's essentially what evolution is. And you hear oftentimes, evolution's just a theory. Well, what do we mean by a theory? It's something that has, according to the scientific method, that has been built up with a substantial body of evidence. Okay, so it's not just, you know, I have a theory that that you know, it might snow next week. It's something with a substantial body of evidence to support it. And in fact, evolution is a fundamental paradigm, but there are many theories of how evolution works. There's gradualism, punctuated equilibrium, and scientists argue a whole lot about exactly how it works. Nobody argues about whether it exists. You know, it's like next year's Super Bowl. People are going to argue a lot about who's going to be in and win next year's Super Bowl. But that doesn't mean that that the Super Bowl is just a theory. You know, the Super Bowl is going to happen. We just need to know how it's going to happen. So let's go on to intelligent design. And let me just read you a definition of intelligent design, and then I'm going to make the point that, one, it's not valid based upon scientific principles, and secondly, that it's dangerous. So what it means is, so it's based upon the notion that certain aspects of life exhibit what's called irreducible complexity, and that science can't explain them, so they had to be created. Okay, and so here's what irreducible complexity is. By irreducibly complex, I mean a single system composed of several well-matched interacting parts that contribute to the basic function, wherein the removal of any one of the parts causes the system to effectively cease functioning. Okay? And there are a lot of things that the intelligent design people have claimed are irreducibly complex. And it just doesn't stand up to scientific scrutiny. And I won't go into a lot of the details on it. You know, we can discuss that more at lunch. But to a large extent, irreducibly complex means that we don't understand the system well enough yet to figure out how it's not irreducibly complex. Second, it's dangerous. So science constantly strives to get the answers. We don't know something, we try to figure it out. And that's the challenge, is to discover the unknown. So let's say that we resort to the intelligent design way of thinking, which is that when we come up against a wall, we say, God did it. And, you know, maybe God did do it. Okay? But for us to stop because we don't understand it just brings science to a halt. And, you know, an example of why this kind of pseudoscience is dangerous, you know, we can look to Stalinist Russia. There was a guy, Lysenko, who got politically in favor. He was a proponent of the Lamarck style of inheritance of acquired traits. To make a long story short, Stalin loved him, so everybody had to listen to him and not argue with him with like real science. And he was the over all of agriculture. As a result, millions of people died from famine because of his flawed ideas. So, you know, right now the intelligent design isn't going to cause widespread famine, but as a barrier to scientific thought, it is potentially dangerous. Okay, so let's talk then just about evolution and theology. I've just told you that in order to pursue a scientific discovery toward the natural world, that we can't draw upon divine intervention. Okay, so does that mean that there is this conflict, that there's a battle between science and religion. Well, no. Earlier on, I talked about the divergence of science and philosophy. And what was it that made them be different disciplines? It wasn't that, what they believed was different. It was their tools. The philosophers use pure reason. The scientists use experimentation. And science without reason, or reason without observation of the world around us, neither is a complete way of doing things. So the point is that science has things that it can do, and reason or faith has the things that it can do. Okay? So let's talk about golf. It has been said that evolution provides support for atheism because mechanistic evolution provides an explanation for everything that we see around us without invoking the existence of God. Okay, so God can be taken out of the picture. Now, I'm not a golfer, but from friends of mine who play golf, it seems to me that the way that many people experience the game, it would be a very good justification for denying the existence of a just and loving God. And that's a little bit facetious, but the point is that you don't need to invoke the existence of God to play golf. You don't need to invoke the existence of God to put together evolutionary theory, but they're just apples and oranges. And in fact, there is I think, a very, very good compatibility in that when you look at the conduct of science, science is not a body of facts. It's a method of discovery. And in science, there is no room for faith. What we say is, in God we trust. All others, please provide data. However, in a scientist, there's very ample room for faith. And, in one of the readings earlier today, it made the statement that God created man in his image and likeness. And on a regular basis, we as men create God in our own image and likeness. If we are hateful and intolerant, then we believe in a hateful and an intolerant God. If we are loving and accepting, that's the kind of God that we think of. And when I look at a God that has to go in and recreate repeatedly as species get wiped out, or when you get to a point where the natural selection won't work, has to go, oh crap, that's not going to work. So let's come in and we're going to create something irreducibly complex. That to me is not as wonderful a God as the one who, at a single moment, at the Big Bang of creation, puts into order a system in which, over the course of billions of years, left on its own, is going to culminate in what we see here. So one can be an atheist and believe in evolution, but that's sad. And so ultimately, the two spheres of science and faith need to be kept separate to do what they do well. But for society to be full, we need both.